We are in the day one of the coronavirus lockdown, and we seem to be getting along with a wing and a winning smile. I really don't like to pick on old Jacinda Ardern. At, Sorry, guys. At the end of the day, she's just a person. I've never met her. I imagine if I did meet her, I'd find her quite good, curious, and nice person. Um, But unfortunately, she's also been made to be a particular brand. There's been a marketing decision to involve her around this person. She represents the mother of all dragons, and she's picked because she has certain skill sets. She's very good at communicating. She's very good at presenting things, and she makes us feel that everything's all okay. And that's okay if it's true, and if it's not, it's okay if you've got a media that's critical. That's um, pointing out the flaws in the postcard perfect image, but we don't actually have either of that. One of the things we're told to do during this crisis is to listen to the experts. Just do as you're told and don't be a dick. Okay, well that's fair enough. All good advice. But one of the things that the experts told us, which is the World Health Organisation, is that one of the best ways to combat this disease is to test. In fact, his words were test, test, and test. And I think he probably would have added a test, test, and do some more testing. Um, when we look at, for example, the countries like Germany, which is about 0.03% in contagion rate, lowest rating is mostly because they picked up what was going on early on and they got their shit together and they tested like fuck, and it's paying dividends now. We're not testing. Our ratio of testing is slightly a little bit better than Italy, which is not exactly a standard you want to kind of reach for. Um, and it's quite strange, the whole emergency planning process, especially since the last year we've created the National Emergency Management Agency. Biosecurity and Operation Guardian has been one of their top main areas that they've been kind of rehearsing and practicing for, at least for the last 2 years. And going back to articles I wrote for Deadline magazine, going back as far as 2005, the issue of a pandemic, influenza-based pandemic, has been a likely crisis. Has been basically, I've been reporting that since then. And again, according to authorities and some of the world leading experts, this has been one of the big things which we have really been caught with our pants down around our feet. Can't blame that on Jacinda Ardern. Much of that stuff actually happened way before she was in actual power, but it's just an example of the fact that not all is well in the paradise as we've been made to think. One of the things that occurred to me, and I'll start off with the top listing of things which I think we can be doing to counter that, and some of this has actually been put forward to me as a request by my clients. That is when I had clients, because who's got clients these days? One of the things that was basically said to me is I traveled around for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and we realised that there was this issue taking place, and I got to Nelson and realised I had a one last chance to come home, and so I took it. Can you please get the word out that we need to be tested? And this is from all the hostels and hotel people have been making. They've been getting people coming staying there that are flown into the country. They're self isolating, and yet nobody within the Ministry of Health or anybody from authority has come near these people in person, given them any briefing or any emergency advice, or just basics. This is how you keep a lockdown in place. We need to get your guests to give you passports so they understand that actually they've made an agreement with you. You need to make sure that there's not, if you've got like 50 guests, that they're not all going to the supermarket to get food, because that's all a risk. But mostly, what they really need is to be tested, and no one's telling them how that can actually happen. We know that the front line of the cases so far from people from overseas bringing it in seems to be the natural target, but there seems to be no way to go to these smaller haystacks in the whole country, which is where they're going to be going, and where you've got people saying this is where I'm staying, so you've got some kind of computer coding and working on a process of how we get all these places tested. Because as we've been shown by the World Health Organisation, test, and by Germany, what the dividends of that testing process is occurring. literally even people beg this to me. I'm also rather a bit surprised when I went to the airport. I had to catch 2 aeroplanes and a bus, and when I got to the airport, there really wasn't any sign of any major change in situation. There was a few little posters up in the bathroom, but that was about it. You didn't see people running around squirting disinfectant around the place. There wasn't a place that you could come and get masks. There wasn't a place you could do gloves. I mean, we're talking gloves and masks, cheap shit. That shouldn't be that hard to fucking actually have at an airport. You come to the airport, you check in, they give you a little baggie in a fucking plastic bag, you put it on, da da da. All about reducing containment. Not actually happening. Went on board the aeroplane. We were told that people will be sitting separately. That isn't the case at all. I had one person sitting in front of me, and I had 4 people sitting directly behind me. We were all actually clumped in one area, which I think was done more for the staff on the plane than the passengers. And I get that because these guys are flying there all the time. They had gloves on. They did a fucking sterling job. They were very, very clearly frightened. And yet they kept their heads about them, and they wore their gloves, and they were very, very impeccable about that, but they didn't have any masks on them at all. So if you just read the number of times that they're flying the flights per day, and the fact that there's no testing of those staff seems to be really taking place, you kind of have to go, what the fuck is going on? We're told we're in a lockdown, and yet we're still getting airplanes flying into the country. On my page, there's a screenshot of basically global traffic. So, for a contagion, the plane business as usual. They're all flying around in their hermetically sealed devices, just spreading germs like they do. So yeah, that's the reality of where we're at. Of course, also the other thing is that we're getting these guests that are arriving in the country, and we've got people at the Freedom Campaign, and they're still isolating the vans, which is fine until the authorities turned around and chose to lock down the well, in the case of this in Kakura, that's the only case I'm aware of, but I imagine this is they're following a protocol where the toilets were shut down. So now none of those freedom campers can actually get access to water or means to dispose of their poos. Which of course will mean you are risking the issue of hygiene conditions within the environment, and of course imagine a lot of those people will out of desperation will be forced to break self-isolation and again enhance the contagion factor. Again, doesn't seem to be really in the contingency plan. We've had governments are very, very willing to accept these tourist dollars and can't get enough tourist dollars, but when the foot's on the other fan, we've actually been pretty bad hosts in this regard. But overall, I mean, my own personation about this situation is that the tourism industry, which was one of our big earners for the country, has been torpedoed, and the army workers in it and the brigade of people who run businesses are being basically left to fend for themselves. As I keep saying, not one of these people has been approached by the ministry directly. The information they've been given has been very generic. There doesn't seem to be anybody appointed to the certain region. So our job is to go around and visit all these things, say, right, have you got a check place in place? No, what do you need? There is no consultation going on, and yet it's a very important area to consult because this is probably the biggest source area that the pathogen is likely to come from. It's just being left to do its thing. Of course, the enforcement rules deal with such things as the police are able to now come into your home and check to make sure that you're self-isolating. And I've seen cases where the police came up to the hostel looking for someone. Lovely people, like I'm a journalist by nature. I'm always racking up the authorities because that's kind of my job. In this case, you have to sort of step back a little bit and realize that they're just like you and I. They have families and members and dreams, and they're pretty fucking spooked. And what really upset me the most for those guys, no gloves been given to them, no masks, no sign that there been any protection given to those front lines. In fact, we hear the case recently of the police and the military having a softball game up in Palmerston North with one of these groups of people that come from that hadn't been tested, and they now actually have it, which means all the people that are going to come into your home to check whether you're self-isolated or at a roadblock pretty much all are carriers themselves. So that's kind of defeating the purpose of the exercise to begin with. I haven't spoken to any paramedics directly. I have several people in my network that drifting little bits of information, general public, but overall it doesn't seem like they're being given any briefings or advanced training. They're not being told to say, well, this is what's going to happen if this occurs, or da 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 da. So they've been pretty much all left in the blind themselves, and obviously we're making things up as we go along. But the thing is, all these things like the National Emergency Management Authority, they have been rehearsing and training for these for a number of years, been given quite substantial budgets to do so and quite substantial powers. And so far, they don't seem to have any plan of how to get that information out. It's been very much an environment of we're in control and do as we're told. And now that this environment's come about, it's rapidly clear that authoritarian model actually hasn't worked. And I'll go back to this point too about one of the things I explained to you is that when I was in the Territorial Armed Forces for 6 years, I did a number of my training exercises were conducted in Wairau, and there's a building up there called the Centre for Strategic International Studies, and made up of some very, very clever people who are very good at their forward modelling and better than any other intelligence group I know on the planet. They've looked at the stuff, so that'll go into another little building that's quite interesting in Wairau, which is this little moated building, complete with barbed wire, security codes, very, very, and it has every imaginable scenario that you can occur, and pretty much we have seen nothing come out of our Defence Force, our National Emergency Management team, saying, well, okay, this is the scenario we're looking at, and these are the basic plans, and these are the things that we need to look forward to, and this is what we're not being told what's going to happen in the future. We're being told, oh, this is what's happening today, and this is a report, and we're doing this. It's all reactive, with no attempt to give us information to empower ourselves so that if the next event occurs on top of it, we know what to do. The assumption, that wasn't a coronavirus cough, at least, well, I won't know until another 14 days, will I? But the assumption is that now that we're all home, that it'll all be great, we'll be all home, we'll be watching our Netflix, and we'll be sitting in front of our electric heaters, and we'll all be coping. But that's, of course, assuming that our internet continues, because if that goes down, then we'll be really restricted on our flow of information, and largely relying on on our media, which is doing a pretty fucking piss poor job, as they, again, don't really look into some of these serious and deeper issues which affect the entire nation, and they need to shift their focus a little bit from getting ratings and creating story to actually realizing they're here to inform the public and give us the best information we can, because we need that information so that we can keep ourselves safe. On that level, of course, one of the things is said, we're planning for this idea that life carries on pretty much as it is, but internet goes down, we're fucked. Electricity goes down, we're fucked. Especially, of course, a lot of these supermarkets which have got things which are limited, can only run for so long before they have to be chucked out because contamination. We haven't been told, as an example, I think it would have been quite logical to turn around and bring fucking potatoes and basic things like flours and stuff that we can actually cook on a fire, just rudimentary stuff. Bring that prices right down to the bottom. And I wouldn't say panic buying, but make it quite clear that, okay, guys, you want to get this, I can get 2 of these. So, yeah, take 2 or 3 of those, because this is your emergency food, rice, things that you can actually fall back on if suddenly the comfort of our lovely 21st century world goes kaput, which it may very well happen. And there's a number of reasons why it may happen. The most logical one is that we're looking at systems overloads, and we're also looking at systems that still need people to maintain them. And they're automated systems, but if you don't have the people to maintain them, then they soon things go a bit pear-shaped. Example of it, of course, was the social media censorship, we were told, because they didn't have enough people to keep the algorithms running properly, instead of going off on its own little tangent and censoring everything. At least that's what we've been told. And why wouldn't I trust the authorities? I'm a trusting kind of guy. Of course, you ramp up the scale to that. Of course, we've got the issues of, we're going on a wing and a smile, hoping everything's going to be hinky-dinky for the next 2 weeks, And that's our first problem, is that we think it's only going to be 2 weeks. It's going to be a lot longer than that. But of course, what an event we have an earthquake, because it's not like New Zealand doesn't have earthquakes. And saying that, like I said on my link today, there's been several earthquakes around the rim of fire at the moment, and some of those places like Russia and Japan, which is in the kind of the Aleutian Peninsula, have been, over the last 10 years I've looked at those issues, they've been always been precursors. They get it, then not long afterwards we get it, and we've had a spate of those. So I'm not saying, this is not a forecast, by the way. I'm just making a point of suddenly what happens when we have to have national defence, emergency people, police dealing with two crises at once, when the first one they've not really kind of been geared up for, and there isn't even thought about, well, what happens if it gets worse? We're just wing and a smile. Seems like a pretty fucking crazy way to run an emergency to me. And of course, people will turn around and say, "Oh, you can't criticise Jacinda. She's been for this and that." Yeah, actually, I can. And number one is because that's my job, and it wouldn't matter if John Key was here. I mean, like, let's get in a situation like we've got this sort of thing where when John Key was elected, like, well, who else is going to do the job? Who else? And even I'd say, oh, fuck, God, at that time things were pretty hopeless in Labour. Now there's the situation's role reversed. It's like, let's trust Simon. Simon. I think we're in a pretty fucking piss poor situation where that's where we come down to our policies. Is that government runs on the one person who appears to be more competent than the other. I don't have that attitude. I don't care who's in government. I'm always here to fucking critique them, because that's the issue, the whole purpose of the fourth estate. And when you're looking at a crisis like this, it's the least popular job to have, but it's also the most essential one. We can't just have a government saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and have no one critique it. Also, wait a minute, because at the moment there's a lot of trust going on that the powers that we're placed in the government's hands aren't going to be abused, or they'll be rescinded once the crisis has occurred. I don't think that's, well, let me put it this way. The point of the matter is that trust may actually be one of the things which is part of our safety, our protection measures. We kind of have to take a bit of a blind leap of faith and hope for the best. However, at the same time, that's where the media steps in these events, going, well, look, we're giving you the powers and so on, but we are taking note, we are observing, we are got these questions which we will expect you, when the crisis occurred, to deal with. That's what a healthy democracy has, and it's part of the functions which keeps that democracy stable, so that we can have both the benefits of living in a Western world which democracy has brought us all things like justice, good health systems, and means everyone actually, in practice, as opposed to slipping down the road where we become something like China, where we just trust the state to look after us. And I'm not one likely to do that, so I'm going to keep asking these questions. Of course, so the issues we have here is what has been done to make sure we get more of that testing done. What has been done to address those frontline concerns about the people that have come into the country, to make sure they've been tested, so that we can figure out where the disease is coming from and best contain it and isolate it? What are we doing to avoid cross-contamination, which includes making sure that the people who are online to man those checkpoints, make sure that the laws are being enforced, are not put at risk themselves, and then in turn putting us at risk? And what have we been given by the same government to say, look, this is what we're doing, but these are the things that we're doing in place to make sure that we make a mistake during the situation, there will be accountability. What are we doing to see that I'm not this is not a blame game, but this is basically about us being told to have faith and a winning smile, and I'm going, no, this is too important. You want to put you're dumb enough and cowardly enough to put your faith, your responsibility in someone else's hands. I'm not. So if my government does this, I want to hear them say, well, we're going to be having a royal inquiry at the end of the day to turn around so people can ask questions and learn from it, improve it, figure out these are the issues that we hadn't dealt with beforehand. So we're going to use this learning exercise to actually make sure the next time it happens, we've got a better way of response to dealing with it, and make sure any mistakes that we made for the wrong reasons are addressed. Some of those reasons might be just we didn't know. That's actually quite legitimate. Some might be because some scumbag or the fucking team said, oh, there's an opportunity for me to make money. There's checks and places went in place to stop that kind of abuse. So within this whole process, there will need to be a sense of an internal audit afterwards, which again, we're not hearing. We're just hearing the reactionary stuff, but we also need to have this other channel open up to us to make sure that we're not thinking about the reactionary, but we're actually forward thinking. And so far, we're not forward thinking, we're reacting, and that is really relying on us being fucking lucky, really lucky. And so far, those stats are not adding up in terms of saying we saw what happened with Italy, they didn't test, boom, we now appear to be going down that same road, and we are not really taking this thing seriously, and we're doing everything half a day later, $1 short. I think that will be enough today. The key thing is I would like people to get through into this message that the number one thing that we were advised by the experts is to test. And if our national media won't be taking those questions to the Prime Minister and saying, well, when are we going to get the testing kits? Where are they going to be done? How are they going to be administrated? What are you doing to get out to those frontline high-risk response spots? Then you guys need to be asked doing that. And at this stage, this is a group effort. At the end of the day, when I'm doing my thing normally, I can go out there and I can do a YouTube clip. I can print out newspapers. I can go and talk to people. There's all sorts of things I can do to get my message out normally. But right now, I'm pretty much all like you guys. This is my voice. So I need people like you to be my megaphone and have these discussions out there. I think it's also very important, something which I'm going to probably hamper on a wee bit too, is that I have spent the last 10 days, generally speaking, not commenting a lot or saying a lot, because the three things that have got into my mind has been, number one is that there's so much noise out there, fear, apprehension, risks, rumours, conjecture, that unless you've got something to actually add to the equation, which is based in authority and has some, concrete steps to take forward, you're just adding to that white noise and adding to the confusion and the fear. And we really can't afford to have that. There's going to be other serious issues which I'll look at in other videos down the road, which, if the world goes the way that I think it is, we're going to live in a world of increased censorship. There's going to be a certain social engineering so that you challenge certain conventions which are now increasingly becoming the acceptable dogma, that you'll be not necessarily listened to with the adult logical part of the brain, but people will be responding from the emotional trigger response, and in a way our government's kind of going to rely on that to push forward their agenda. And we'll get into those things later on, but the point I'm making is that whatever you're talking about, whatever you're critiquing about, it's going to become really, really essential that you provide information to back that actually up. That when you look at that information that's backing it up, you've got to say to yourself, well, who is this person who sits there doing a podcast from their bedroom? In my case, my case, I can say, well, my credentials are, I have a university degree in political science and history, so my areas that I will be talking about will be about geopolitical events. I will also be talking about national security aspects of it, because that, again, is what my degree touches into. It's what I did 6 years with the armed forces, actively training, and courses relate to the issues of things like securities, checkpoints, vetting. That's the making sure your information has been authenticated, emergency crisis. So I'll be talking about it from that perspective. And I'll also be talking about it from the economic aspect of it, from the fact that I'm representing a clientele basis of about 300 people that are really, really affected by this, and I'm acting as a voice piece from them. So those are the areas that I plan to basically stick to. I will, get into things like the issue of where this came from, what are some of the things we're doing, and again, I'll be coming back from my own previous writings from that, and I'll be coming from my emergency crisis response. But along the way, as I'm saying this from that expertise and sticking to the areas which are my knitting, I plan to give you guys the source information and the link knowledge, if not on the podcast I'm doing to you right now, available in terms of links below, either photographs I've taken myself or information from sources which I think we would all agree that they're credible in terms of I generally, as a rule of thumb, I try to stick to mainstream sources. Not necessarily because there aren't people out there in the alternative area that can't report news or don't have information, but I'm in all each of those cases we're looking at organisations that understand the fact that if you write something that is a falsehood or a lie, you're subject to defamation laws, and that's a fine, and it has huge consequences on stock holdings and da da da. So in other words, there is an element of there's an accountability factor in what they're doing, and those are information that the sources that I'll be trying to basically provide you with. And I think that's pretty much it. I've got a lot to say. I've been thinking about this for the last couple of weeks, and there's a lot of stuff to be done. I'm not going to turn around and give it to you like 50 fucking podcasts a day. I think that's a little bit too much. But every 2 or 3 days, I will be dropping a podcast onto you guys for you to actually go look and have a look and think about things. And I think we'll do it for the main day today. My main point of my podcast has been, where is the testing? When is that going to start taking place? What steps have been put in place to ensure that happens? How can we help those people on the front lines, which include our guests from overseas that are now all clumped in together with people who have got no training in crisis emergency management? How can we help our first responders, that's our paramedics, our police, and our military, who ultimately, and I can give you this as a word of guarantee, they are Kiwis, and they ultimately, at the end of the day, are not there to bring about harm. They may respond as an agency to bureaucracy, and things can come back true, but mostly, at the end of the day, we're not a big enough country that we have that whole issue of everyone's a stranger. We actually are all one. And if you treat those people coming through the door in a way which shows and recognises that you see them as human beings, I'm sure that you will get that in kind. And especially if in a way that, I said I was dealing with a policewoman the other day. I didn't treat her like a policewoman. I treated her like a normal person, and she really appreciated it, because right now the whole world's on her back. I didn't have to give away any of my sovereignty. I didn't have to fucking, do anything that I wasn't comfortable with. But I recognised there was more to be gained by getting her to realise that the people that she's dealing with are people as well. So this has been Vision from Ben's World reporting. Stay safe. We have never seen anything like this in the history. I will endeavour to give you my best promise that when I'm reporting this stuff, I'm going to try and have a real keep it calm and keep it methodological, because there's no point adding to any emotional level of this. It's not constructive. I will say it is going to get harder before it gets easy, and I mean, I would say borrow that line from the Boy Scouts, which is hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And that worse will be compounded because the fact that we are only living on a day-to-day basis. So when we go to the supermarket and we buy this stuff and like, yeah, great, fantastic, we can got Pop-Tarts and whatever, and then we get home and suddenly electricity fucking, and suddenly we've got actually no real food because we didn't buy according to what the worst case scenario was. We lived in this little rosy ideal about sitting around watching Netflix. It may not be like that at all. It may get really, really like our grandparents' World War II rationing, pretty bleak, uncomfortable times, which there's a lot of things you can do to reduce that discomfort and enhance your safety, but don't go into the thinking that you're at Club Med and it's all going to come out the other end and it's going to be fucking rosy, because it's not. The world has changed, people. I think that's enough for me today on that topic. This is Ben Vision reporting for Ben's World. Find me on Ben's World Postman Productions on website, as long as you have the internet, however long that may be. Cheers.